Hey, so this is open Q&A. Who's up?
So
Yeah.
why does because this is the whole thing. The Torah kind of foreshadows what's to come. I mean, by starting out with the famine in Egypt, why does the Torah need to foreshadow it? Like, is this a literary device, or is this a significant device in the Torah?
It's a very important point, and I think that this has been written. There's a whole literature on this. Ramban talks about this in great detail. Ma'aseh Avos Simon Lebanim. What occurred to the patriarchs are signposts for the descendants of what's going to happen to them. And I think the normal understanding is it's not just kind of revelation of what the future will be like, but what they went through lays the groundwork by which it takes place. It's setting in motion a certain real background through which it takes place. And this could have profound implications. Let's see if I can give you a good example of this. People, for example, ask, we'll come to this passage, Miz Hashem, where Isaac is asked to be sacrificed by Abraham. Now, most of the emphasis is on trying to understand Abraham, but if you look at Isaac, he was willing to die. He didn't die, but he was willing to die. So then some people say, well, okay, but hasn't that been acted out thousands and thousands of times in history, where people are willing to die rather than to give up on the truth, what's right, what's good? Certainly Jews in future generations. So why do we think of Isaac as doing something so unique and so outstanding? And one answer is the ability of succeeding generations to do it is because Isaac, so to speak, brought it into the world. He brought that power into the world. He laid a foundation for it. Later generations were leaning on that power when they made their subsequent decisions. Not only in terms of inspiration and the genuine psychological idea that, well, if he could do it, then I should do it. That's also a direct psychological impression. But he laid the groundwork for it. He laid down a track in the world that other people could follow. By the way, who was the first runner in the world to run a mile in less than four minutes? I used to use, huh? No. No. A mile. No, he was a British runner. I used to use this. I've written this up in one of my books. Huh?
It was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. So until he did it, people wrote about this, that the 4-minute mile is impossible. If a person tries to do that, he's going to die. Yeah. And he did it, and the year that he did it, 3 other people did it. It was like a psychological barrier. You know? That's too much. The human body can't handle that. Once he showed it could be done, they let go of that break in their brain, and they let themselves do it. But in addition to that, something like sacrifice. So there's a case of Hannah and her 7 sons, which the Gemara talks about, where the emperor said, I want you to bow down to me. And the children, one by one, said, no, I'm not going to do it. And he killed them one by one in front of her. And at the end, she said to the souls of her sons, when you're going to come up and you're going to go before Abraham, tell him that he was told to sacrifice 1, and I sacrificed 7. Now, the superficial reader reads that, you think you're something, Abraham? You didn't even do it. It was called off at the end. I sacrificed 7. I'm much greater than you are. That's dumb. Excuse me. She's not making fun of Abraham. What she's saying is, look what I was able to do because of what you did. You did it, and therefore you brought that into the world, and I was able to carry it out also. So I think that's also part of what's going on here. In each case, it's not just the events of those years, it's what the patriarchs did. Ma'aseh Avos Simon Lebanim. What the patriarchs did became signposts and precedents and powers that are put into the world to enable what happened later.
Unlike Jews that committed to keep the Torah after mass revelation at Mount Sinai, and us accepting it before, how then are non-Jews obligated to keep it Noahide laws, because there was no mass revelation? They didn't actively ever accept the 7 laws.
Okay, there are two important questions here. There wasn't a mass revelation to non-Jews, so then the question will be, what about their knowledge of the laws? And the other is that we accepted the Torah voluntarily. Did they ever accept the laws that they are held to be bound by the Jewish tradition? So the answer to the first question is that there is a tradition coming from Adam, the first person, who was knowledgeable of and was bound by the laws, those laws, and they were repeated to Noach. So it was inserted into their culture. That's where the knowledge is supposed to come from.
All 7 was
Yeah,
told to
that's
Adam.
right. That's right. But the second question is a little more tricky. Let's see. I'm going to take what you asked and sort of turn it upside down. Kodesh Baruch Hu commanded Adam, these are my laws for you. And Noach, these are my laws for you. And then he told Abraham, you have to keep circumcision. Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't ask permission, didn't ask them to agree. He simply ordered them. The creator of the universe has that authority. Why he has that authority is a long, complicated question, and I've answered it many times. This is recorded. But the bottom line is he has the authority to do that. Now you point out, 2 days before the revelation at Sinai, Moshe Rabbeinu said to the people, the Creator has a Torah, and he wants to give it. Will you accept it voluntarily? And they said yes. But that was on the 4th of Sivan. But 2 days later, on the 6th of Sivan, when they stood at Sinai, Torah tells us that they stood at the bottom of the mountain. And the oral tradition explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu held the mountain over their heads, which is a story unto itself, which I may come back to. He held the mountain over their heads and said, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, this is where you're going to die. That's coercion. So if they already accepted it on the 4th of Sivan, 2 days before, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu put them through this experience of seeming coercion? There's a lot of discussion of this, and the Maharal has a very deep point to make here, which is directed exactly at your question. He says, let's say we rely on the 4th of Sivan, and they voluntarily accepted it, and that's all. Now, imagine 2 centuries later, Jewish people's living in Israel, keeping the mitzvahs and everything else, and a child asks his father, Abba, why are we keeping these laws? Where does it come from? And his father says, 200 years ago, our ancestors committed themselves to God, and that's how we became committed, and that's why we're keeping them. The child asks his father, so that means that if we hadn't agreed, we didn't say yes and take it on ourselves, then what? Then would the world have gone on without the Torah in the world? And you could back it up. After all, up until that time, the Torah wasn't in the world. The world went on for hundreds of years without the Torah being practiced. Because Baruch Hu offered it to us. We said yes. If we had not said yes, then who knows? Maybe the world could go on forever without the Torah, or go on for another 500 years without the Torah. Says the Maharal, what holding the mountain over their heads on the 6th of Sivan told them was, this acceptance was absolutely necessary. There was no real option to say no. It's wonderful that when you thought you had an option, you said yes instead of no. It's wonderful, but I want you to know that in reality, there's no way that we could have been avoided. This is necessary for the continued existence of the world. And this, you may have heard this last week when we read Parshas Bereshis, that every day, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, second day, third day, fourth day, except for the sixth day, which is Yom Ha-Shishi, the sixth day. Doesn't say the for the other days. And the Midrash comments, this is a pointer to, sort of in your spirit, this is a pointer to the 6th of Sivan, the 6th. Which 6th? The 6th of Sivan, which is when they'll receive the Torah, to tell you that this creation, this 6th-day creation, stands on the premise that on the 6th day of Sivan, the Jews will receive the Torah. And if not, the whole thing's going to be Baal. So in fact, there is no, the choice isn't the only source of our obligation. There's also a necessity built into it. So choice is not a requirement for being responsible to do what the Creator requires us to do. That's why it's no loss that they didn't have an opportunity to say yes or no. Yeah.
So we're about to begin this week's Parsha Lech Lecha, where the Torah will now be focusing on Abraham. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Abraham in his early life was an idol worshiper, even though the Torah does not record this. And when I think about it, I think about not only myself, but also like other Baal Teshuvah, who have had not religious or maybe even sinful past lives until they became religious. Now, what I wonder is, how does a person, especially a Baal Teshuvah, come to regret his past sins, if he should, in cases where he may not actually feel bad for a sin, such as like not keeping kosher because maybe there are foods that are not kosher yet he found delicious, and he misses those days, or especially if he thinks that his sinful past life was meant to build up to where he is right now.
So I think the question is very apropos. Now you're asking about regret, and although there is a midrash which says that Abraham discovered God at the age of 3, the Rambam says that he discovered God at the age of 40. And according to a different text of the Rambam's works, it was 48. And the Rambam says, word for word, that he offered sacrifices to idols with his own hands. Now, so you ask, what about a regular Baal Teshuvah? Avram, in a certain sense, was the first grand Baal Teshuvah. And now the question is about feeling regret for my past actions and so forth and so on.
Wait a minute. How is he about Teshuvah?
Because he started out as an idol worshiper. That's pretty far away. That's pretty bad.
That's a convert.
But he had to make the Teshuvah for his
But
sin.
obviously he had to give up idol worship.
Idol worship is a sin for all people, not just Jews.
So I thought about Teshuvah was somebody who's born Jewish, but they just do Teshuvah.
So, you're raising also an important point. Some people who were here many years ago wrote a book about Teshuvah, and they asked me to write the introduction. And I was thinking about Baal Teshuvah, and it's even more than that. The normal use of Baal Teshuvah for thousands of years meant a person who's born into a Jewish family and had a Jewish education and believes in God and believes in the Torah and commits himself to do everything right, but does some things wrong. And then he pulls himself together and changes direction. If you're not born into a religious family at all and you don't know anything about Torah, does the term Baal Teshuvah apply or not? So I think you're right. Historically, it's a new usage. It isn't the way it was used in the past. But there's a Sfas Emes who indicates that the words really mean you're returning to someplace where you were. And he has a place that, if I remember correctly, a quotation from the Zohar, souls that come into this world, before they come into this world, the souls are in some sense in a direct relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they come into this world, they now have blocks against that direct relationship. And the whole of life is trying to rebuild that connection as much as you can while you're in this world. And that can be called a Baal Teshuvah also. So I agree it's a kind of extension of the idea, not the whole of the individual idea. And that's the sense in which it's applied to by people today to Avram. In fact, I think you're right. I don't remember in the classical literature he's ever called a Baal Teshuvah. But the concept is there. So now, there's a very important point in answer to his question that people need to keep in mind, especially people who are grafting more and more onto their understanding of Torah and their practice of Torah. To regret something means you take responsibility for it. I was guilty of making a bad choice. Guilty of making a bad choice. But if you had no way of knowing the truth, you're not guilty. The choice was a bad choice, but you're not guilty. It's as if you take a 5-year-old and you put him in a room where he's never been before and you leave him alone, and there's a light switch. So he presses the light switch. He doesn't know that the light switch sets off a bomb in the next room. Nobody told him. He can't read B-O-M-B on the label. It was terrible. He blew up the next room, but he's not guilty of anything. It's just beyond his capacity to know. Similarly, we have a rule. You want to know something's kosher, ask somebody, and that person's responsible person says it's kosher, you don't have to investigate anymore. One faithful person tells you it's kosher, it's kosher. If it turns out to be treif later, you did all that you're supposed to do. You asked someone and he told you it's kosher. So you don't feel regret for that. You don't feel regret for that. You don't beat yourself up over it. You don't say, I'm guilty and have to reform and so forth and so on, because you're responsible for that. So really, I used to do a calculation. If you're 22 and you now decided to keep Shabbos, from 13 to 22 is 9 years, times 52, do the math in your head.
9 times 52.
It's a lot of Shabbosos. How can I atone for 460 broken Shabbosos? The answer is you don't have to atone for them. You had no responsibility for them. You had no reason to think that anything that you did was wrong. So that, I think, would be Abraham's. Now, if you trip on, somebody trips and falls on somebody and breaks his vase or something. When you pick yourself up, it's natural to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But you don't mean, "I'm guilty, please forgive me," because you're not guilty. You tripped and fell. But you want to tell the person, "I wish this hadn't happened because I feel for your loss." Abraham could feel that about his participation in idol worship. But then he would have to ask himself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put my soul into a person born into an idol worshiping family. Now we come close to what you said. Well, then maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu set this up. He gave me this background because he wanted me to react to this background. He wanted me to overcome this background. Then I think any kind of regret would be a mistake. Because Baruch Hu knows what he's doing, and he put me in a situation where I had no other choice, and I wasn't responsible for what I did. That means he chose that I should be involved in this type of activity. But having said that, let's just ruminate a little bit more on what you mentioned. So Abraham is someone who grafted himself away from idol worship on his own, and then he preached the rest of the world, made thousands of converts. Isaac was born into the family of Abraham and Sarah. He started out on the best possible level. Kodesh Mibeten is what they say about him. He was born for spiritual greatness, and he realized spiritual greatness. Then came Yaakov, who took from his father and grandfather and used it to form really the Jewish nation. He and his children formed the microcosm of the Jewish nation, and that's why his name, Yaakov's name, is given to the Jewish nation. Yaakov's other name is Yisrael. Yisrael is the name of the nation. Abraham and Isaac didn't give their names to the nation, only Yaakov did. Now let's ask, does this mean that one or another of the patriarchs is greater, better, higher than the other ones? And the trick answer is no, because each one built on what the previous one accomplished.
Mm.
Isaac couldn't have been Isaac without an Abraham to precede him. So if you measure from, let's go from 0 to 90, if Abraham goes from 0 to 30, Yitzchak goes from 30 to 60, and Yaakov goes from 60 to 90, Yaakov's at 90. And the others weren't at 90, and the Gemara actually registers this. But how much difference did they make? They each made a 30 difference. So I don't know anywhere that we understand that in terms of merit, closeness to God, reward, and so forth and so on, that we distinguish between the three patriarchs. But how they got there was very, very different. Okay?
I read this book by Rabbi, when God is there, and he was talking about like repentance, and it was saying that like when your sin reflects your character, and then you sin, but it doesn't reflect your character. What does that mean?
This is a very important point. I don't know this, Rabbi, that you're referring to, but he's making a very important point. Some things that people do, that are what you call in character, and some things are out of character. In character is what happens almost all the time. When a person reacts, you could see he's reacted that way before to things that have happened before, and it's because he has a certain element in his personality which pushes him to react that way. That's something which I think we all experience all the time, and that we see it with other people all the time. It does happen, more rarely. Something happens, and you respond, and you say, "Boy, I didn't dream I would respond like that." And it can be either positive or negative. Sometimes something happens, and you get very angry, and you think, "Why did I get so angry? What does it mean to me?" Probably I haven't been under that kind of circumstance before. I think I was insulted in public. Maybe it never happened to me before. So, some people just laugh it off. And it enraged me. Why did I react that way? Or, for example, this has happened to people that I know. There's a sudden crisis, and the person responds well. Doesn't go to pieces, responds calmly, in a directed way, and solves the crisis. And afterwards, the person says, "I didn't know I could do that. If somebody had asked me if I'd be able to handle something like that, I would never have guessed I would be able to do it." So not everything is in character. Some things are in character, some things aren't. And of course, you sort of mentioned this, the big difference, because if I do something that's in character that's wrong, the Musa talks about this a lot, trace it back to your character trait, where it came from, and realize that stopping the action isn't enough. You have to also fix the character that you have, which led to that action. Whereas if it's out of character, then one has to be just careful to anticipate when those circumstances might happen again, and to take precautions. One doesn't have to go through that kind of depth psychological analysis. Rav Dessler uses this to explain the idea of schus avos, the merit of the patriarchs. Many sources indicate that Jews who have the merit of the patriarchs, they do a transgression, will get a more lenient treatment than non-Jews who don't have the merit of the patriarchs. So, Odessa says the obvious point that how can the fact that I had good great-grandparents reduce my responsibility for what I do? They live their lives, I don't live my life. So he says that those who have the merit of the ancestors standing for them, that means that the same action isn't related to their character as the person whose action doesn't have that background. It's more essential to him, and therefore it's deeper in him, as less essential in the Jew, and therefore it's more superficial, and therefore the reaction to it is a lesser reaction. Of course, you have to understand that this is not just biological. It's not just a kind of spiritual biology. Well, it's a long time since the patriarchs, and I have this trickle down pseudo DNA effect, and therefore I have this character. A person has to relate to that character.
It's similar out of his natural.
Okay.
Element.
Well, that's very tricky. With Pinchas, it's very tricky. Let me stick with the patriarchs for a minute. Maybe we'll come back to Pinchas also. It's a very tricky case. There's a pre-tzaddik over there that goes into it in depth. The idea of having the merit of the patriarchs requires some recognition on the part of the descendant. There's a very fascinating comment of the Gaon of Vilna. It says that in Egypt, at a certain point in time, the Pharaoh increased the pressure, increased the oppression, and then he died, and the Jews cried out because of the oppression, and God heard their prayer and set in motion the process by which they would be rescued from there. So the Gaon of Vilna says there's a progression here. Pharaoh increased the oppression. That caused them to cry out, causing them to cry out to pray to God. God heard the prayer, and thereby, now the Gaon of Vilna says, so don't the verses say that God saved the Jews from Egypt because of his promise to the patriarchs?
Yeah.
And it does. So why is the Gaon of Vilna giving this picture of how they connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And the Gaon of Vilna says it was because of the promise to the patriarchs, but that doesn't determine how many and who will go. After all, some of you are aware that after the golden calf, Hashem says to Moses, my plan is to wipe them all out and make a new nation out of you. The promise to the patriarchs, I'll keep my promise to your descendants, but I'll wipe them all out. Same thing after the transgression of the spies. Says the same thing. Both cases, Moses prays and God, so to speak, doesn't carry it out. So there's a famous midrash that says that of the Jews in the generation of the Exodus had in it 15 million Jews, and only 20% left. And the other 80% died in the 3 days of darkness, and they were buried in 3 days of darkness. So that means even though there's a promise to the patriarchs, that doesn't determine who or how many are actually going to go out. So now, says the Gaon of Vilna, the process works as follows. Pharaoh increases the oppression. The people are in more pain. They cry out to God. By crying out to God, the people connect themselves to the patriarchs. And now that they're connected to the patriarchs, the promise to the patriarchs applies to them. And that's how they're saved. But it requires that kind of connection. So when we said before that the Schus Avos, the merit of the patriarchs, means that your action of failure is not as essential to your character, that depends that you should be connected. It's not just guaranteed. A person can lose that. He can lose that by his actions. And that's why Chazal say that Schus Avos can run out. The merit of the patriarchs can run out. The Bris Avos, the covenant that he made with the patriarchs, can't run out. But the merit of the patriarchs could run out, because you could lose that connection to their merit. Yeah? Okay? So what's it he said?
Kind of in regards to what you were saying before, where Pharaoh gets more cruel and means that the Jewish people cry out more and feel more patriotic. I think there's a step there where God hardens Pharaoh's heart, right?
Well, that's not in this context. That's where Moses is coming to him already and asking him to let the people go, and he's suffering from the plagues, which haven't started yet. And normally, according to the Rambam anyway, normally he would let them go, but God doesn't want him to let them go, so he hardens his heart, so he'll give the negative answer. That's something that happens at a later stage in history. Okay.
Yeah, so I was just kind of curious about, because last week you kind of exposed kind of Pandora's box with talking about the relationship between men and women, which Jewish dating is Pandora's box, I'm sorry. But I don't know if you resolved it, but it just felt like you were saying, well, man should just kind of always listen to his life. But the question is, does that pose like a man becoming a passenger in his own life in modernity, or does that, like, what's the counterbalance? Because if marriage is like a binary star system, what's the counterbalance between men and women?
Okay, so maybe I emphasized one more than the other, but we have recordings of all these shiur.
Okay.
If you go back, you'll see that this is the way I put it, that she has something to contribute, which in a certain area of life, setting priorities and so forth and so on. That's not all there is in life. And she's more reliable than he is, and therefore he should always listen, know that he needs to know what she has to say. But I said, in the end, he doesn't have to agree. He doesn't have to agree. But if he has to say, if I haven't heard her, I haven't understood her, I can't make a decision on my own. Because I'm missing some crucial insight into what the reality is. That's the thing that's absolute. But of course he doesn't have to agree. I did speak about, I think, I'm not trying which lecture it was. I did speak about resolving conflicts between the two of them and going to, remember we talked about who's he obeying? Is he obeying his wife, or is he obeying the authority? If they go to an authority whom they both respect, and he'll tell the one, in the case of Abraham and Sarah, Abraham was told to do what Sarah told him to do, but he told him more. He said, "Obey her." Right? But that's the procedure. When you don't agree, then go to someone whom you both respect, so you could receive what that person tells you is the right thing to do. No, it doesn't mean to always agree, but it means to always understand that without that input, your decision is going to be questionable.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. All right.
Yeah.
So it says at the end of Parshas Bereshis, it says that God saw that all the thoughts in man's heart were evil, and then in Parshas Noach, after the flood, after God flooded the world, and then Noach brought an offering, God said that I will not flood the world again because of man, the thoughts of man's heart are evil from his birth. So what is the difference between the generation before the flood and after the flood? Given that the thoughts in man's heart are evil.
Let me check what you're talking about, because I'm not connecting with the second one with the first one. Okay, that's here now.
You could look at chapter 6, or before the flood, and then chapter 8, verse 21 or 22, or after the flood.
Yeah, let's see what it says here. Second. So if you look carefully, it's a good question, very good question. If you look carefully, you'll see the first time in Genesis it says, V'chol, this is page 27 in the Blue Book. This is chapter 6, verse 5. Well, I'll read it to you in English. Hashem saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every product of the thoughts of his heart was evil always. Here it doesn't say from his youth, and here it says every. It says every thought, all life long. Now over here, it says, in English, since the imagery of man's heart is evil from his youth. It says from his youth, and it doesn't say all. So, on the surface, there's a big difference. It means that, let's take the one in the later one. People start off with a negative character, with negative ideas, with negative, right? Well, you start off as a baby, right? And 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds are not noted for their sensitivity and generosity and so forth and so on. You know, it's my truck, get it off my truck. So, and then if they grow up and they can overcome it and do better, so then that would be a reason to be merciful for them. This gives you an indication of what the obstacles are that they have to overcome to develop well. And in Genesis, it sounds like there's no hope, because throughout their lives, whatever they're doing is evil. So they're only superficially similar. But it's nice that you pointed out. Frankly, I never put the two of them together before. Yeah. What else is on people's minds? Yeah.
I guess another question based off of those two sources makes me wonder, what is Torah's perspective on human nature? Like, are people basically good? Are they basically bad? Are they born innocent?
Well, this is a very important question, because there's a lot of talk about this in contemporary literature, and there's an enormous amount of oversimplification that goes on. People, why would you think that one or two, either people are basically good or people are basically bad? You really think people are that simple? There's just one strand, and that one strand, everything else is just decoration? I mean, I find my superficial reading of psychology, many, many theories of psychology take a single strand of human behavior or human character, and they blow it up as if it's the whole picture. That's why there are so many different theories of psychology, aside from the ones that are just fantasy. But the ones that aren't just fantasy, they take something which is genuine, but they make it into the whole story. Now we see the ultimate creation of man as a dualism. And the Ramchal in the Derech Hashem puts this extremely well, and I don't see it with other writers, but he says the following: man is created to exercise free will. Free will requires conflict and motivation. So, as I saw in a paper in the Journal of Philosophy many years ago, imagine a case like this. You're at a Noam party, and there's lots of guests there, a wealthy estate, and there's a pool. You're standing next to the pool, and an 18-month-old baby falls into the pool. You're the only one standing next to the pool. That baby's going to die unless you take the baby out. What motivations do you have that are in favor of saving the baby? Wow, like a whole raft of them, right? You're saving a human life, and the parents will love you forever, and you'll have the congratulations of your conscience, and you'll have the respect of your friends, and so forth and so on.
I think it's instinctual.
Huh?
It's instinctual.
Okay. So now, ask yourself the following question. What motivation do you have against saving the child's life? Now, don't think of a monster. Think of yourself. What in you would say, don't save him? If you're like almost everybody, the answer is nothing. Don't save him? Are you crazy? Why shouldn't I save him? Said the author of this paper, philosophy paper, if all your motivations are on one side, you're not exercising free will. Free will is when you stand in a conflict and you decide which way to go, but that's when you have two ways that you could go. And the two ways means that you resonate, to use the jargon, something in you responds to each way. So in order for there to be free will, there has to be conflict motivation. Therefore, Kodesh Baruch Hu creates human being with Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra, with good inclination and evil inclination, because they embody good motivation and bad motivation. The way in which he engineers for us good and bad inclinations to give us a soul and a body. That means the soul's function is to present the good motivation, and the body's function is to present the bad motivation, so that there'll be conflict, so that there'll be free will. Says the Ramchal, there where he classifies the whole of creation, the only two-dimensional creature is man. Animals are not two-dimensional. Angels are not two-dimensional. Even Shadim, whatever they are not two-dimensional. They have features from both sides, but they are a single creature with different types of features. But the human being is made out of two creatures. The soul is one creature. The body is a different creature. They're different sources. They live in association with one another. And according to most, I would say the vast majority, with notable exceptions, like the Rambam and a few others, when you ask, what is the human being is the soul and the body together. That's what the human being is. The human being is a compound. The human being is not a soul riding around in a body. That would be a description for the Rambam. Because in the world to come, there are no bodies. There are only souls.
So
Whatever that means.
I do anything that's instinctual, I eliminate my choice of free will.
Almost, but then who's the I that's doing it? So listen to the way the Ramchal puts it. The Ramchal is, he's a great philosopher, the Ramchal. Among other things, he's a great philosopher. He says free will works like this. The soul decides to control and direct the body, then things work out well. Or the soul decides to release the body, decides to let go of the body, and then the body operates on its own, and things work out badly. But notice, the soul does all the deciding, all the deciding. The body can't fight against the soul. Impossible. It's outclassed. But the soul can decide to let the body operate on its own. That's when the tragedy takes place.
But why would the soul?
Let's take a second. Yeah.
But who decides what the soul does? The soul's on auto drive, so the person has to choose.
And who's the person?
That's the brain.
So there's the part of the person which is the faculty of free will. The soul has, according to the classical definition, the soul has different elements, different dimensions. One of them is called ruach, and the ruach of the spiritual component of the human being, that's where the decision takes place. Who lifted the book? I did, but only my arm went up. Only my arm went up.
Who had the thought?
So why do I say who lifted it? Because my arm lifted the book up. So when you say who decided, it's the person that decided, but he didn't decide with his toes. He decided. The ruach in him is what does the deciding, because it's his decision. That's the way I think you have to look at it. At any rate, the decision is the one that is. So now everything's involved in the decision. It's not just the one. Last question.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it, because how do we then rectify free will versus determinism in a world where we essentially believe in prophecy and that things are foretold? How do we contextualize what free will actually is, especially when Hashem and Shemayim controls actually so many aspects of our lives? What defines free wills?
Okay, there's about 4 or 5 very important fundamental questions in those few words, but the reference to prophecy, Rambam discusses this explicitly in the laws of Teshuvah, and if you look at the prophecies are always non-distinct. Prophecy doesn't say tomorrow you're going to decide to, milk the cows. So in the future, in some generation or other, some generation will do X, Y, Z. Then, since each person could decide one way or the other, it doesn't threaten free will at all. If you ask, part of your question, and this is where there's a really deep question, and that is because Baruch Hu is running the world, isn't he? Part of his running the world is to create the capacity for free will. Create something which operates on its own. Now, some people, when they hear that, say, yeah, but he's sort of letting go of the world. He's sort of letting go of his control of the world. And I think the right attitude is, well, you think he can't do that? Why would he be limited so that he couldn't do that? Yeah, that's what he does. Lets go of control of part of the world because he has the capacity to do sort of whatever he wants. He's certainly not limited and say that he can't do that. He chose to do that. He chose to have it work that way. He creates something that operates on its own.
So does that mean without Hashem we wouldn't have free will?
Absolutely.
So we
Without Hashem, you wouldn't exist.
Sure.
And that includes the free will part. Absolutely. Absolutely.
But if somehow you could exist independent from God,
Impossible.
But if you're in a set of circumstances constantly, I think you already pointed this earlier. I mean, how could that not be considered coercive?
I would ask the opposite. How could it be considered coercive
If you
if
don't know.
he makes it? If he makes it in such a way that it operates on its own. I'll give you a rough example, then I have to go. You have the nucleus of an atom.
Okay.
It has in it roughly protons and neutrons, plus pions and mesons and all the rest of that stuff and quarks. Okay, it's got neutrons and protons. Now, as long as the nucleus is whole, it's stable. Bust it and have the particles scatter, then you have a free neutron. A free neutron spontaneously decays into a proton, a neutrino, and something or other. Right? After a certain period of time, which according to quantum mechanics is indeterminate, could happen in any period of time, right? So as long as the neutron is inside the nucleus together, it won't decay. Suppose I break the nucleus. So now the neutron decays all by itself. It just can't decay when it's in the nucleus. But when I break the nucleus, I don't cause it to decay. According to quantum mechanics, that just happens. I just took away a preventative. So it's like there are laws of nature, so to speak. God says, I'm creating a hole here. And over here, the laws of nature don't poke in. And they don't could determine what happens. Now I'm putting something in this hole that operate by itself. Right? So if I can do it with neutrons, this world can surely do it with his creation. Look, free will is a very